So what Pokedex entry is so terrible that it ruins all of Pokemon Legends Arceus? It's Vaporeons. Now don't ask why I'm researching Vaporeon, just look at this filth. Tests show that its cells closely resemble water molecules, which perhaps explains its ability to conceal its form while submerged. Now weirdos are going to say, Verlisify, this is you just being a perma-hater and deranged as always, because that's just Vaporeon's Pokedex entry. Which is the point. It shows how careless and lazy and contradicting and nonsensical Pokemon Legends Arceus is. Because you're telling me that the primitive culture that's barely understanding and discovering Pokeballs and calls Pokemon terrifying creatures understands how molecules work? And this is also another weird thing about the Pokedex entries, because some of them are making like hard statements about how this is the Pokemon, and it goes even beyond what we see in Red and Blue version and early Pokemon, where it's more observations about how the Pokemon works. It would have been cool if it's like, maybe there's some reason why this Pokemon can conceal itself and become like water. That's all it needs to be. And there's a couple of other Pokedex entries in Pokemon Legends Arceus like that. But instead, they're just like, yep, we already know it's molecules whenever this takes place. We don't understand how X-rays work, and we talk about legends and some say, even though we are the some say and we are legends, literally. So it's not even like trying to pinpoint anything about the game, and that's just really weird. What I dislike about Pokemon Legends is despite Legends being in the name, there's clearly no consideration for the existing history of Pokemon. It doesn't answer any questions. It doesn't give us any depth about the actual history of the Pokemon world. It's just a sloppy fanfic. But fine, maybe this makes sense somewhere. And now you got me looking up the history of molecular theory, where maybe we can actually put a date onto what's going on in Pokemon Legends Arceus, because 1811. So that's when there was a pretty good idea of how molecules work, which means Pokemon Legends Arceus has to take place past at least 1811 to even understand what a molecule is, and then just kind of slap that in there for how Vaporeon operates. Now I know there's a lot of discussion and theories about when Pokemon Legends Arceus actually takes place. However, absolutely none of it is confirmed or conclusive, but a lot of people are putting it around the mid-1800s because of how Japanese eras work, so let's just see how that lines up. We talked about Luxray earlier, and again, this is where the Pokedex entry, legends say that when Luxray's two eyes shimmer with gold, the Pokemon can see through anything. So just an observation about the Pokemon. Alright, when were X-rays discovered? 1895. So going off of the Pokedex entries, we actually have 1811 between 1895, and just like that, some dude that doesn't even like Pokemon Legends Arceus has given more real evidence to the timeline than anyone else. This is why I hate the Pokemon community. It's all frauds and bad actors just making shit up, and I'm the only one trying to be factual inside of it. But let's keep going, because we have Hisuian Decidueyes entry where it talks about, oh, it adapted to Hisui's extreme cold. Therefore, this is firm proof that evolution can be influenced by environment. Let's actually talk about Darwinism for a bit. Now, evolution in Pokemon is different to evolution in the real world, except for regional variants, because regional variants show that you can take a species, put them somewhere else, and then they adapt to their environment, and that's going to be evolution, which is mirrored in Pokemon. So, on the origin of species, when was that? 1844 essay, and then published in 1859. Timeline still holding up. Therefore, Verlisify always wrong. No, wait a second. Actually, this just kind of proves the entire thing is BS. Because if Pokemon Legends Arceus actually takes place in like the mid-1800s, and that's maybe what Game Freak is hinting at, they got a little problem. And that's this dude. And these things. The developers thought, oh, if we base them off apricorns, it still plays into the lore. But no, now we have a lot of problems, because let's read the entry for apricorns. They can be hollowed out and fitted with special devices to function as Pokeballs. This process was developed sometime between 400 and 700 years before the present day. That's quite removed from the 1800s that we're potentially dealing with in Pokemon Legends Arceus. In the Hisui region, people craft Pokeballs using brown apricorns and tumblestones. In the modern day, only specialists such as Kurt can make Pokeballs from apricorns. But it gets even worse for Pokemon Legends Arceus, because Professor Laventon mentions that Pokeballs are a recent invention. That that's where just, like, this is why I didn't like Pokemon Legends Arceus from the start. My initial reaction after seeing the website and then seeing the Pokeball was, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I already knew apricorns were several hundred years old, and now there's going to be such a timeline mess. Pokemon Legends Arceus cannot be salvaged. Verlicify always right, and it also doesn't even pass the eye test. You're telling me a 10-year-old kid can take a berry and a rock and then turn it into some kind of Pokeball that uses steam technology? And that was another thing when I first saw that, where it's like, it puffs steam when a Pokemon is successfully captured, and that was like one of the first things revealed about Pokemon Legends Arceus after the Pokemon Day trailer. I went, oh, they don't care at all. They're just making up some kind of fanfic nonsense, and that also doesn't even explain the more complex Pokeballs, because like Pokeballs are a recent invention, even though we're still dealing with like apricorn balls, and this is before we get the standardization of the modern Pokeball, but we still have the Ultra Ball, and some kid can just craft a better Pokeball. Nah, it doesn't make sense. It makes even less sense when the anime gets involved, because we have modern-looking Pokeballs being shown to be several hundred years old, but we also have Professor Oak's Pokeball when he was a kid, and that was a lot more rudimentary, and that was like 50 years ago. But also, even Apriballs look pretty modernized, and then there's just like Pokeballs being shown throughout history where it's like, yeah, a modern-ish looking Pokeball has been represented through hundreds of years of Pokemon world lore and history, and then all of a sudden this Hisui thing comes along out of nowhere. There's also some contradictions with like early Pokemon information when everything was kind of like getting going. In several books in relation to the core series, the Encyclopedia Pokemonica, Pocket Monsters Encyclopedia, and the Pokemon Daisuke Club website that describes the Pokemon world, it states that the modern Pokeballs were developed in 1925 from the research of Professor Westwood at Celadon University, so origins going to Kanto. He got the idea when experimenting on Primeape, which curled up into a ball and shrank down small enough to fit in the professor's glasses case. So it's like, yeah, actually Pokemon shrinking down, that's been a large part of Pokemon lore and how Pokeball development began at some point. Now, this was made in the late 90s, so it'd be very relevant to the development of Johto and the apricorn balls, so I don't see too much contradiction here, just kind of the natural progression and evolution of the development of the Pokeball. But then Pokemon Legends Arceus comes in and just makes up a halfway point that doesn't even make sense. Also, I find it very interesting that they try to tie the timeline to the real world very closely. Like, yeah, 1925, early industrial revolution and crafting and stuff, and that's how we have the modern Pokeball. Just maybe the Pokemon world is a little bit accelerated in relation to ours because of all the crazy technology when you have a fantasy world you can develop. But at least they'll say things like that, and we also have other games talking about the timeline very confidently. So, Mimikyu exists because of the rise of Pikachu-styled merchandise 20 years ago. Porygon gets talked about 20 years ago. It just kind of happened, which lines up with Red and Blue version. And then canonically, Pokemon Sun and Moon taking place 20 years after that. Red shirt even has 96 on it, and it's not like some kind of coincidence or Easter egg. No, it's a part of the concept art. Our first dive in the Pokemon world happened in 1996, and around 20 years later, boom, we got Red. So it's not like exactly 20, could be 18, could be 22, Red's age is whatever. But it also shows that there is absolutely no confidence when it comes to the history of the Pokemon history game, since they will not give us a date or timeline for when it occurs, because no matter what, it's going to break something in the established Pokemon history, which just kind of proves Pokemon Legends is trash no matter what Pokedex entry we're looking at. Now, the super mega cope from idiots is that they say, well, we have time traveling and multiverses inside of Pokemon, so this could just be a separate multiverse, therefore they're allowed to make up whatever they want. First, that just fails because it's objectively bad storytelling. But also, we can tie in Pokemon Legends Arceus into the main canon because of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Professor Laventon makes a cameo in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet during history class. A photo of him appears on the classroom board as a part of a timeline on the history and development of the Pokeball. So anything from Pokemon Legends on is just fan service made up crap. It really is that Meat Canyon cameo about the Mario movie, isn't it? Where the only thing that's happening is just pointing and going, oh, look at that! Look how good this game is! They did the thing! She looks like Cyrus! Oh my god, that looks like Mars! They care so much because look at all the fan service they're giving us! When actually, it's just complete fanfic garbage. And another thing I hate about the Pokedex entries, aside from the contradictions and bastardization of the scientific method, is Laventon taking credit for other regions' Pokemon. He coined the term Scalchop for Oshawott. Bro, he brought Oshawott from another region, and everyone from the Galaxy Research Corp is from a different region. Like, it doesn't work that way. Also, creating the term aura for Lucario? No, there's no way. He is also the one that observes that unknown resemble human writing from other lands, even though no one takes him seriously. Well, now we got problems, because people in Pokemon were getting along just fine in the Johto region, and that was hundreds of years before the Brass Tower burned down. And we already understand how the Johto region works, and there's the Sinjo ruins. God, I haven't even considered, maybe I did in one of my other, like, Pokemon Legends videos, but, like, I haven't even considered that for this video, where it's like, wait, we already have Sinnoh and Johto being connected. Why is Sinnoh so massively underdeveloped and no one understands anything about the Pokemon? And wait, the ruins of Alph are already ancient and hint to earlier civilization, and they're called Alph because of alphabet. So Laventon didn't discover this, and there's no reason for anyone to make fun of him. It's all hokey crap. Okay, so that already extra super mega debunks Pokemon Legends Arceus, but let's keep going, because we just made the connection to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which also makes the connection to the Blueberry Academy, which makes the connection back to Unova. And that gives us even more problems because of Pokemon Black and White 2, where Drayden claims Pokeballs didn't exist when he was a young boy. It's unknown if he means they hadn't been invented at all, or they just hadn't made their way to the Unova region. But the Unova region was already in contact with other regions, which is why we have Oshawott and all the other people from the Survey Corps. Great. Which gives me another Verlicify always right as to why Gen 5 is the worst generation in Pokemon and the Black and White series is the worst, because there's no respect for Pokemon. It was the methodical destruction of Pokemon for Black and White, but then it kind of comes full circle because the games canon back into the anime, because Ash exists in Pokemon Sun and Moon, which also exists during the same timeline and time frame, and we also have Red inside of it. So we have Ash Greninja, we got a picture of Ash in Mimikyu's room, and we have all this like weird stuff that's kind of been established. So what it shows is like Pokemon Sun and Moon cared enough to responsibly tie everything together for the Pokemon world. Generation 8, I don't see any problems with that, but then Pokemon Legends Arceus came along, made the Legends game, and decided it's all thrown away. It's Hisui now, even though Hisui would be only like 160 years in the past, where Spiritomb existed 500 years ago, and there's Sinnoh folk stories. So like Sinnoh folklore talking about Arceus would go further back than what takes place for Hisui. None of this needed to exist, and it shows why everything is so terrible. And then Pokemon Legends Arceus, in all of its fanfic glory, just steals the Sinnoh myths. That's not fan service. It's not a callback. That's not a Wojak pointing backwards moment. That just shows that it's all made up and garbage. So, like, if the game throws away the established history of the region it's taking place in, how does anything else make sense inside of it? I wanted to go into the Survey Corps, but I think I've already made enough of a case, and I still have a couple other points to loop around into. The group is made up of people from other regions, including Hoenn, Alola, Galar. We also have Johto and Unova Pokemon being brought in. So, like, and even if we go into, like, the Hisui Snow anime, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of trade and commerce coming into the Hisui region, yet it's still the most underdeveloped region, and they're taking, like, the most incompetent people from other regions that already have established history and not developing anything, and somehow it's still Hisui, while we have AZ wandering around, and we still need to figure out what happened to the Relic Castle. And it's not happening around the same time like, oh yeah, it was a few hundred years ago when AZ did the thing. No, there were Pokemon Wars going on thousands of years before Pokemon Legends Arceus. Also, Laventon being from Galar opens up another can of worms. So there's a lot of things connecting it. Oh boy, a little Easter egg for the fans to discover. But the Darkest Day, that was 3,000 years ago in the Galar region. And that talks about how two boys became kings, utilizing the Pokemon of that region. So yeah, I could see where Pokemon are terrifying creatures because of the Darkest Day, but Pokemon are also heroes. And then if Pokemon can work and come together, which is also talked about in Sinnoh folklore, there once were Pokemon that became very close to humans. There once were humans and Pokemon that ate together at the same table. There was a time where there existed no difference to distinguish the two. It talks about marriage in the Japanese version, but still. And there's also like some other things about, don't mess around with the lake guardians and don't be like too malicious towards Pokemon and other like cautionary tales. But those cautionary tales would predate Hisui anyways, as it's already been established, which is why Pokemon Legends can't put a timeline onto any of it. But nah, Pokemon are terrifying creatures. Also, I wanted to see how far back Galar history went because the Bulbapedia page isn't accurate since it ignores the old lady that lives in the region who's a gym leader. So we got Opal, who became gym leader at 18 and has held it for 70 years. Now, because the timeline is already similar, that means like in the 1950s, she was a gym leader and she took over from her mother. So that means the history of competitive Pokemon battling in the Galar region does date back over 100 years at least, and we don't have any more details beyond that. But then you also have to look at the development of the cities and the castles, which lines up like between the Darkest Day and early 1900s. Galar region was doing just fine in developing and working with Pokemon and having some kind of capture method somehow. So yeah, it turns out importing people and Pokemon from other regions doesn't really work out when trying to tell a cohesive story about Hisui, because now you gotta deal with those stories from those regions, and it makes absolutely no sense. So why even call the game Legends? So that was like one of the first things I said, where I was like, I determined all of this from the reveal and the Pokeball, and I've been completely beyond right the entire time. And then I did the unspeakable act of reading the website and seeing that the game itself was going to suck. Add information to your Pokedex by catching Pokemon, but catching a Pokemon once won't be enough to complete its Pokedex entry. Okay, so we have the worst story in a story-based Pokemon game, we have the worst gameplay loop, and then the developers deliberately ruined other gameplay features to make them worse for the sake of artificial difficulty, which again is objectively bad game design. The Hisuian Pokeball is the only type of Pokeball that always reduces the catch rate of a Pokemon. And then people are going to say, well, that's because it's an older Pokeball. We're not at the modern Pokeball. But we already have Apriballs, which are specially crafted to have benefits for catching certain types of Pokemon. It's just there to make the gameplay clunky, like the battle styles and the damage formula being changed, and then having no actual PvP or multiplayer. It's just an awful game. So yeah, that's why I say Pokemon are terrifying creatures is the worst line ever uttered in the Pokemon franchise.